In this video, I want to talk about a few guitar trends that I feel seem to be on their way out, just from my experience as a live guitarist over the past decade or so. The first trend I see disappearing is the popularity of EMG pickups. Not active pickups. I think other brands like Fishman are more popular than ever, but specifically EMGs. I'm a big fan of EMGs, and I think that EMGs into a super overdrive into an 800 is one of the greatest sounds, and everybody should try to experience that at some point, preferably in a Les Paul shaped guitar. I think over the past 10, maybe 15 years, their popularity has decreased significantly. Maybe this coincides with the increase in popularity of amp modelling and amp profiling. Most amp modelers come with built-in noise gates, sometimes multiple gates, so noise isn't so much of an issue. Plus the fact that you're not dealing with high voltage, inherently noisy old analog technology, there's less noise anyway. Aesthetically, yeah, it can be difficult to get them to look right in some guitars, but they've definitely made it easier with the chrome versions or sets like the Headset that have the traditional looking pole pieces too. From a few feet away, you'd probably never even realise they were EMGs. I think the moment it really hit me the most was when I was making a video earlier this year looking at the new lineups from LTD and ESP. EMG and ESP LTD are like the Beavis and Butthead of the guitar world. They go together so well, and they've been associated with each other for like 35 plus years. Now it looks like they've joined everybody else and have decided to go with Fishman Fluence and passives more than EMGs. There's so much to enjoy about EMG pickups. Low noise, easy installation, easy to set up and get the right pickup height. Just set it as close to the strings as possible, within reason. If you like heavily compressed pickups, they have them, and most people assume that's all they have. But again, they have models like the Headset, which I think have a huge dynamic range. I do think it's a shame, but I also think that these things come and go in cycles, so you never know, they might make a comeback, hopefully. Second on my list was quite a difficult one because I want to just say cabs, but I do think that's true, but I think more specifically 4x12 cabs. These have been dying out for years and years now in favour of 212s and 112s. I think that the vertical 212s have probably become the standard for live situations now. And when I play gigs, I look around at the other bands, and generally it's either no cabs or vertical 212s. And although I love 4x12s, I'd much rather see my favourite bands use 2x12s over no cabs in smaller venues, because if you're an audience member and you're down the front at a cabless gig, good luck hearing anything other than drums. I've been to so many gigs recently that have had no cabs on stage in smaller 300 to 500 capacity venues, and it's literally drums featuring some vocals. 4x12s are big, heavy, and probably overkill for most situations, but it doesn't have to be a volume thing. I like to use 4x12s because they feel more spaced. They're more omnidirectional, not necessarily louder. In fact, I find myself being able to play at a much lower level overall than if I was playing a smaller, more directional 2x12 or 1x12. But there's no denying the size and weight limitations of bigger cabs, especially when you're playing a lineup with many bands and many changeovers. I try to overcome this by being willing to share my cab with the other bands. It makes it easier for everyone and ensures that I get a decent sound when my band plays. I'm happy to admit defeat on the 4x12 cab debate though, and accept 2x12s are the new standard in guitar cabs, even if it does leave us slightly more at the mercy of the venue's sound engineer, just slightly. Oh, and just before I continue, please hit the subscribe button if you're enjoying this. It doesn't cost anything and it helps me out massively. Thank you so much. Number 3 is scooped mids. I should have mentioned on the outset of this video that my channel, if you're new here, focuses on heavier types of music. I'm into heavy rock, metal, 80s rock, pop punk, new metal, and that kind of thing, so this is from my perspective. Scooped mids in rock and metal has been a thing since the 80s with thrash bands. Then I'd say it's quite popular in grunge and new metal and post-grunge. But it seems that once the new wave of American heavy metal hit in the early to mid 2000s, the early metalcore stuff, the mid style started to move in the opposite direction. All the way up until modern gent bands where the sounds have become very mid-focused and it suits the music really well. The introduction of more mids, I think, overall was a welcome change. Definitely from a guitarist perspective, we can finally be heard again. But I do think it has some drawbacks. The naturally slightly scooped sound of a rectifier and a humbucker, usually a PRS, the sound of the late 90s and early 2000s worked really well to create a wall of sound. It was thick, dense, but because it left space in the mids, it allowed the vocals to sit well and cut without being too loud or having to fight the guitar. So it's a good thing that mids are back, Personally, I would recommend keeping your vocalist in mind though. Your band will probably sound better overall, and then give yourself a massive mid boost when it comes to solos or lead lines and you'll really stand out. 4 on my list is wattage, so how much power your amp has. If you still use one of those, that is, you dinosaur. Go back 10, 20 years and the accepted standard was 100 watt heads, sometimes 50. Everyone I knew had a 900 or a DSL 100. 5150s and 6505s were everywhere. These amps have been attacked from all sides. You've got amp modelers and profilers with direct capabilities from one side, and then mini amp heads like starting with the Orange Tiny Terror and then into the 5150 LBX and the mini rectifiers and the MT15s from another. Mix that with far more efficient PA systems coupled with quieter stages, sometimes even silent stages. They truly face the possibility of extinction at this point. And it's not just the mini amp heads in terms of real amps, the attenuation on some of these amps is just amazing. And although you see loads of 50 watt EVHs on stages everywhere, the majority of them are running at much lower wattage settings. I don't think I've ever been above half on mine, and my drummer is one of the loudest you will ever hear. And of course, I'm going to find a problem with this, and here it is. I like headroom. The issue I find is that once you've got the power amp distorted in a nice way, if you're using effects in the loop, it becomes very similar to running your effects in front of an already distorted amp because of where they're placed in the chain before a distorted power amp. I really don't enjoy the sound of a delay in front of a high gain amp, and I know it's the way people used to do it. I don't like it. We have effects loops for a reason, and I like to use them. Same with reverb. For me, that's an effects loop only effect. So I'm more than happy to jump onto the lower wattage movement, but I do need enough to give me some headroom. 30 to 40 watts is probably ideal. Might sound like a lot, but it's still far less than the classic 100 watts. 5 on my list may be connected to my first point, but I'm not sure to what degree, and that's high output pickups. I understand why, it's obvious. Well, it's a few reasons actually. In the past, we didn't have anywhere near the amount of gain that we've got on amps today, and at one point a JCM 800 was considered a high gain amp. And I don't know if you've had any experience with them, but I can tell you, if you go in expecting a high gain amp, then you're going to be very disappointed. You needed these higher output pickups to really push the front ends of the amp and kick it into overdrive. Even later in the mid-90s, with the introduction of the rectifier, rectifiers have far less gain than you would imagine, and it's why so many of us feel they need to be boosted by an overdrive or high output pickups. And today we've got JVMs, EVH amps, Rockaverbs, Engels, Black Stars, all available for not too much money, especially if you look used. And they've got all the gain and compression you could ever want. And digital clipping isn't something we ever want, so when we use some of the older modelers or audio interfaces like early versions of the Focusrite Scarlett series, input clipping is a real problem, and lower output pickups solve that problem. And then when you consider the pedal market now compared to 20 years ago, there's no comparison. I wouldn't have ever considered getting my high gain sounds from a pedal back then versus an amp, but now you've got some of the best high gain sounds available in pedal format at any price point. You can stack pedals and have far more control over your sound without relying on hot pickups to push things into overdrive. And you now rarely see Invaders, X2Ns or EMG 81s, and players are now way more into lower to mid-gain pickups, preferring to sculpt their sounds in their Kempers and Fractals as opposed to being tonally limited. I still love Invaders, and I recently had one installed in this Charvel SoCal along with the Sustainiac, so let me know if you want to see a video on that. I think it's really cool. If you want to see the worst 8 guitars in my opinion, please check out this video here. Thank you so much for watching.